Hello, welcome to another episode of Varsity360. I'm Columbian sports editor Micah Rice, joined today by assistant sports editor and high school sports coordinator Tim Martinez. And Tim, we have 1 week in the bag for the high school football season. So Friday night was a busy night around Clark County with plenty of games going on. We get our first impression of what teams kind of look like this season. And so the theme of this episode to start off is 3 things we learned from week 1. So let's get right to it. Tim, what was the biggest thing in your mind that we learned from week 1 of high school football in Clark County?
Well, there's so much when teams that go out in week 1. You kind of want to see what they do in action, and there were a lot of things that kind of opened our eyes a little bit. La Center had a nice win against Hawkinson. Battleground opened up with a really nice win at Mark Morris, but I think one thing that kind of stuck out in my mind is the 2A Greater St. Helens League and how that's going to shape up in a battle. And really looking at Washougal and Ridgefield, and they play in week 5, which is the end of September. And I kind of wish the schedule set it up so they'd be playing maybe in week 8 or week 9. Washougal had a really nice opening win against River Ridge at home. It was a little bit uneven at time, but they made some big plays. Holden B made some nice passes to Sam Evers and had a really impressive touchdown run right at the end of the first half. I talked a little bit, chatted a little with Dave Hajek as he was getting ready for the second half, and he was kind of expressed that same sentiment. It was like, that was a little bit rough, but we're working things out. And to come away with a win that I think was like 45-8, was still impressive considering that it was a team that they had to go to overtime to beat last year. And then Ridgefield, lost in week 1 last year to WF West, and that team went on to the state semifinals, I believe. And they went up to Chehalis this week and beat them 27-21. And it looks like Braden Malilla and Logan DeBeaumont are back into sort of switching off quarterback duties, but Braden played very well on Friday. Passed for 180 some yards and a touchdown. He had the go-ahead touchdown around the fourth quarter, and then he had the interception in the end zone, stopping a deep drive by WF West. With about 3 minutes to play. So I had a really big game. So it was an impressive win. So I'm interested to see how those two teams kind of build over the next couple of weeks, heading toward that week 5 matchup against each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those two teams were more or less the consensus pick among us to be right up there at the top of the league vying for that title. But I too was impressed with Ridgefield going on the road against a good WF West team and getting that win. A district opponent, one that you played the previous year, and I know WF West has lost some of their best players to graduation, but really they were sort of out-physicaled in that game. So to go up there and kind of turn the tables on WF West and get that win, to me really is a great starting point for Ridgefield, because I think we all kind of knew that Washougal was even though, like you said, they went to overtime the previous year against River Ridge, we sort of knew that they would be the overwhelming favorite in that week 1 win. But to have both of the teams perform so well, I think definitely raises the stakes for when they eventually clash.
Yeah, I think I watched the video of Ridgefield and WF West just this morning. And, WF West was able to move the ball, but Ridgefield got big stops on defense. They recovered a fumble in the third quarter inside the 10. Josh Bell had a big defensive stop on a 4th and 2 at the 7, about 6 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, and then the interception late. They kind of made stops deep in their field to pull that win out. So they made some big plays, and I think it was a really good win.
Yeah, playmakers making plays. That's what it comes down to. And there were plenty of plays being made for a team that you saw on the nightcap at Kiggins Bowl on Friday night. Skyview, I think we had kind of heaped some big expectations on them preseason. They didn't disappoint in a 28-0 win over Jesuit, a Jesuit team that maybe isn't as dominant as some of the historical teams that they've had there, but still an Oregon powerhouse that is always a great measuring stick for any team. What did you see from Skyview at Kiggins Bowl on Friday?
I think the defense is what stuck up most to me. They're not particularly big on the up front, but they're very quick, And like Steve Kaiser said after, goes, yeah, we're fast when we don't cramp up, which is what often see week one is kids cramping, especially when it was a warm evening on that Friday. But really Skyview made some big plays right off the bat, and they were up 21-0 with about 6 minutes to go in the first quarter. Jake Kennedy had a 60-yard run to set up a touchdown run. Skyview had an interception return for a touchdown, and then they made a defensive stop and got another touchdown. They were up 21-0. But really, from that point on till about the fourth quarter, it was pretty much a scoreless game essentially between those 2 points. And the defense is really what popped out, and so that. We knew they have weapons on offense. Jake Kennedy's very good. They got a good running game. Gavin Packer didn't play. He was nursing an injury, so they didn't even have all their weapons on offense. So I think they were trying to focus more on the run game, and it worked to put up a really nice win. I think Steve Kaiser said afterwards that Jesuit's a good team, and I think Jesuit in week one you're trying to figure out your offense, you're trying to figure out your personnel, and I think Skyview or Jesuit was doing it with their 2 quarterbacks, and so I think once they get that figured out, they'll be a pretty good team, and I think Skyview will look back and say this was a good week one win.
Well, yeah, because especially they're going to be heavy favorites this Friday against a Class 2A Columbia River team, but to have that defense firing on all cylinders right out of the gate, when you thought maybe that was where some of the questions might be, that's got to be one mystery box checked off that you like to see if you're Skyview.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think as the season goes on, they'll probably develop more depth and maybe get some guys with a little bit more size to help them match up against teams that maybe have a really big offensive line.
Speaking of a team that has a big offensive line and a team that really took one of the state's best programs right down to the wire, Camas and Yelm. That game, I don't think that wasn't the kind of matchup. Ending 8-7, Yelm squeaking it out, blocking a field goal in the last minute. I did not foresee that game being the kind of defensive slugfest that it turned out being. I mean, granted, I know there were a lot of penalties and maybe some missed execution on the offensive end, but for Camas to come within 1 point of basically what might be the top team, and certainly with Braden Platt, one of the top recruits in the state of Washington, that was definitely an eyebrow raiser for me.
Yeah, it's funny. It's when you're out at Friday night and you're covering a game, you kind of get lost in your own game. I think I saw that it was 8-7 at halftime, and then we come back in the office and he goes, "Hey, did you see what happened to Camas?" And I was like, "Well, what happened to Camas?" Go, "Oh, they lost 8-7." Yeah. I didn't. I think the biggest thing is you didn't think 15 points were going to be scored in that game, especially last year when Yelm put 44 up on Camas. It's a heartbreaking way to lose. You have a chip shot field goal; it gets blocked at the end. So the Camas kids are probably feeling frustrated. But I think if they look back and look at what they were able to accomplish defensively, I think if you've got a sound defense, that's a good starting point to go off in week one and then build from there. So I think there's good things happening at Camas, and again, when you look at Camas Skyview, that's mid-October. Mm-hmm. That should be an interesting matchup too to look forward to.
Yeah, I mean, it's always the tendency to kind of overreact to week one. So should we read that much into it that Camas really went toe to toe with one of the best teams, and that this sets them up for to be right there with the state's best, or is this kind of one of those, well, it's week one, weird things happen, and that's, I think the standards are always so high at Camas that I tend to lean toward looking at it from the perspective of, maybe they are that good, especially on the defensive side.
Yeah, it's, I think one of the things that you can do, because of the way the high school schedules are set up in 2-year rotations, the same matchups week one this week were the same ones from last year, and you can kind of use that as a gauge. But certainly, teams change from week one to week 5, the end of September, and then on through October. So teams will develop and change. We saw that with Washougal last year. Last year they had to go to overtime to beat River Ridge in a game that they probably should have actually lost in regulation. And then they end up running off, and then they lost to Toppenish in week 2, but then they won 8 straight and finished 9-2, made it to the state playoffs. So it's kind of like you're kind of judging teams based off their starting points right now. Where are they starting off, and then try to judge their potential. But week 2 will bring us a little bit more clarity. We'll get to see a little bit more about what was a week 1 fluky thing and what gets sort of confirmed in week 2. So.
Speaking of week 2, what are you kind of looking ahead to? What do you think the top matchups are for this week?
I'm looking forward to La Center and Woodland. Woodland played pretty well against Camas, an improved Camas team last week, and then La Center just looked really strong against Hawkinson. Maybe Hawkinson's been not as strong as past years, but still the way they just kind of go out there and just sort of ran over them. It was a really impressive week 1 win for them. So that's going to be interesting to see. Otherwise in week 2, again, Camas, they're going to go on the road, Glacier Peak. So that'll be something to watch. It's kind of the last week for the 2As in non-league play before they get ready for league. So it's kind of interesting to see how those teams progress into week 2 before they start matching up into league play in week 3.
Well, definitely lots to look forward to every week, and week 2 will be no exception. One issue that kind of raised a lot of eyebrows headed into the football season was the WIA's announcement that the state championship football games will be held at a single site, and that site being Husky Stadium up there. We wanted to talk about, Tim and I, about just what that means after a few years of having the state championship football games be held at high school stadiums around the Puget Sound area. This is kind of going back to the Gridiron Classic model, and I, for one, am a fan of that. I love, when I got into the profession up working for the News Tribune in Tacoma, we'd always spend the entire weekend at the Tacoma Dome from 10 a.m. to the end of the night just watching state championship game after state championship game. I felt it having that single big destination really added a climactic element to the football season that you didn't get when you're scattered around at a few different locations at a high school setting. But here we are. We're gonna, all eyes on state championship weekend will be at Husky Stadium. Tim, do you think this is a good thing for high school football?
Yeah, I think it's a good thing. I think it's the one thing that every football playoff season that people would bring up on social media or and things about, why are we playing state championship games at a high school facility like Tacoma High School or Spark Stadium at Puyallup or at Harry Lang in Lakewood. I think they want to have that sort of venue to showcase high school championships on that final weekend of the season. And so it's a little bit interesting to see how that all sort of transpired because last year, essentially, the University of Washington made the same proposal to host the state championships last year, and the WIAA took the proposal to their member schools and said, do we want to do this? And at that time, the schools said that they didn't want to, and the reason for it is because the schedule format's a little bit different than when it was at the Tacoma Dome. Tacoma Dome, you would play 2 games on Friday, a game at 4 and a game at 7, and then 4 games on Saturday. But what I think it had to do with the locker room facilities and how quickly they can change one game over to another. So the way it works at the University of Washington is they're going to have to play 3 games on Friday and then 3 games on Saturday. I think kicking off at like 11 and then 3 and then 7. And so the schools that would end up being played in that 11 o'clock Friday game kind of went 11 o'clock Friday morning for a state championship is not great. I think if you ask the kids, well, the kids will play at Husky Stadium at 2 o'clock in the morning. They don't care. But it's not an ideal time to bring booster bus with students. It's not an ideal time to bring the band, the cheerleaders. A lot of these small towns, because they're usually one of the smaller classifications that are going to be playing in that 11 o'clock window. They close up town and head, and so doing that at Friday morning is not ideal. And so it got rejected last year, and then got to propose it again, and the proposal is a 1-year deal. It's like, let's try this out, let's see if this will work. And I think a lot of people are hopeful that people say, okay, let's stick with this, and this will be a venue going forward, because I think it was something that was missing from the last whatever, with three, 4 seasons. I think it was 2019 was the first year that they moved to the high school facilities. And the whole idea of the 3 different sites was that they were close enough so that if you wanted to, you could attend the noon game at one site and 4 o'clock at another site. But I don't think a whole lot of people really took up on that opportunity.
No, and then when you're trying to follow it, having simultaneous games just isn't a very good experience if you're a fan trying to follow either watching a NFHS broadcast or trying to follow updates online. I've always been a fan of let whether it's the 8-man game or the 1As or the 4As, let that game have the spotlight all to itself, and so you get to do that with the setup. And I think the only drawback that I can see is just the fact that Husky Stadium is so massive, and this is the first time that, or not, it's not the first time that high school football has happened in Husky Stadium. Within the last, it was a couple of years ago, or a little longer than that, they had games up there during week 1 or week 2, kind of as a showcase, and then obviously Lumen Field hosted the Emerald City showcase. So I think that if you can get over just seeing that the upper deck is going to be empty, which that's fine.
Probably close it off, I would imagine.
Yeah. I think for the kids, and that's who I've always felt should be the focal point of any of these decisions. The thrill of playing at a soon-to-be Big Ten program, the biggest, one of the biggest venues in the Northwest capacity-wise, an iconic venue that they've seen dozens of times on TV with all those shots of Lake Washington in the background, and for a lot of these kids, they've had relatives or parents or attend University of Washington. Having that be the end point of the high school football season, and in some cases for these kids, their high school careers, the last time they walk off the field will be there at Husky Stadium. I think that's a great thing to make available for these kids.
Yeah. And I also think it's good timing. 2023 is the 50th anniversary of the first state football playoff championship. It started in 1973. When I first learned that, it depends on how old you are, right?
Yeah.
If you're 18, you think, wow, that was a half a century ago. When you're my age, you kind of remember back to 1973 and you think, really, they weren't playing state championships before that? Mm-hmm. But high school sports often follows the collegiate model. Mm-hmm. And for years, college football didn't have a playoff or a championship game. Teams would just play the regular season and then a bowl game, and then you'd have a poll and decide who the national championship was. That's essentially what high school was, 72 prior. Whoever had the best record, and they'd run a poll and they'd say, you're the state champion. It was also different because the high school football season prior to 73 often would end like in Thanksgiving. They would have traditional Thanksgiving Day games. Fort and Bay would traditionally play on Thanksgiving Day, and the other teams had rivalries that played, and so there was some resistance early in 73, like, hey, these traditional games are not going to happen anymore because they'll have to end the season earlier in November to have a playoff. From there, the games championship games were played in the Kingdom for about 15 years, from about late 70s to I think it was 93, and then they moved it to Tacoma Dome in 93 till 2018 when they had to move it out, partly because of the cost to rent the facility, and then the field alignment made it so that if you were sitting back in the grandstand, you had an obstructed view because the grandstand would just drop off and you couldn't see a portion of the field, so it wasn't ideal for viewing. So, and I think the state championship experience should be something special, something unique. And so giving the kids that opportunity to go to a destination site, I think it's going to be a win for them, and hopefully it continues in the future.
Yeah, I hope so too. And obviously anything beyond this year is just speculation because of the 1-year agreement that they planned. But hopefully it works out well. One possibility that might come online in another 5 years or so, and I want to get your thoughts on how you think this would be as a destination high school venue. They're remodeling Memorial Stadium there in Seattle Center, so you have a stadium that is the perfect size basically for a big time high school event, one that's been used by the Seattle Metro schools to host playoff games before. However, the one drawback with Memorial Stadium, besides being a nightmare to drive a car to down there, is that it really hadn't been updated at all since in decades. So you have these bare concrete bleachers, a press box that looked like it might fall off the roof at any time, and just kind of an old dated setting. Now with a remodeled and revamped setting there right under the iconic Space Needle, and an improved mass transit system with the light rail that you can connect with to the monorail to take down to Seattle Center. I think in a few years that if that ends up being where state championship football ends up finally settling, I think that could have a real potential there.
Yeah, it was interesting. I read a story about when the city of Seattle approved to do the remodel on that stadium. There was something in the story that said that they met with the WIAA and it met the WIAA's requirements for the stadium. Well, it was interesting to note because the WIAs, they play playoff games there for years and years and years in that old stadium. So it makes me wonder if it meets the WIA's specifications, is that maybe it has those enlarged locker rooms, which would allow maybe them to move back to that 2-game, 4-game format, which would be more receptive to the format that it was used for years and years and years. But it would, I think, that would also be a good alternative. Work has just begun on that. I think the reason why Union and O'Day played in West Seattle last weekend is because of the improvements going on at Seattle Memorial. But it is kind of a nice destination to go to, and would be a smaller venue but still, I think would still be a good venue to hold a state championship if alternatives of larger venues like Husky Stadium or Lumen Field were not available. So.
Well, I like where it's going with. I think heading to Husky Stadium this fall is a great first step in kind of reclaiming that iconic destination for the end of the football season. Will we have any of our local teams end up there at the state championship weekend? We don't know, but we will see. And the next step in finding out whether that's going to happen comes this Friday, week 2 of the prep football season. As always, follow along, see all our coverage at 360preps.com, and we'll see you out at the football field.